Welcome back. In this final segment, we'll consider the implications for reading instruction, particularly in English, and for remediation of dyslexia. Reading acquisition proceeds more slowly in English than in consistent languages because the inconsistency of English slows the formation of the sublexical pathway. As discussed previously, this creates a catch-22. The inconsistency of English requires strong dependence on the lexical pathway, but the instantiation of the lexical pathway depends on the prior formation of the sublexical pathway. Therefore, reading instruction in English should be designed to speed formation of the sublexical pathway. The sublexical pathway forms on top of the audiovisual speech pathway during the period in which the child sounds out a word by fixating and attentionally selecting each letter. Therefore, reading instruction should promote all aspects of this processing as follows. Phoneme awareness should be taught before children begin to sound out words. Phoneme awareness should involve instruction in how movements of the mouth, tongue, and vocal cords combine to create each phoneme. Children should feel these movements in their own bodies and observe them in others. These efforts should help with the formation of phoneme representations as combinations of phonological features. Instruction on letter recognition should focus on perceiving letters as shapes, which can be promoted by providing three-dimensional letters and having the child trace and write letters. Letter phoneme correspondences should be taught by displaying each letter next to the mouth movements for the corresponding phoneme. This should start the process of formation of automatic letter-phoneme connections on the audiovisual speech pathway. When children sound out words, they should be given words that have the most consistent relationships between letters and phonemes. They should also sound out made-up words, such as nop, which by definition have consistent pronunciations. This emphasis on sounding out letter strings with consistent pronunciations will speed formation of the sublexical pathway. For common words that are inconsistent, such as the, children can be taught to consciously recognize the corresponding letter sequence. Such recognition does not require the lexical pathway. Once the sublexical pathway forms, and children process words by rapid attention shifts, visual word forms can then develop for automatic recognition of inconsistent words. Kids should be instructed to look directly at each letter in sequence when sounding out a word. Letter strings should be presented in large font with ample space between letters to make it easy to attentionally select each letter. If a child has the necessary visual abilities, this preparation should lead to formation of the sublexical pathway and then to spontaneous deployment of rapid attention shifts across the letters. The child is then well on the way to becoming a skilled reader. All reading instruction should be based on our best knowledge of how reading acquisition typically proceeds in the brain. Due to the utter importance of reading in today's society, anything less is a contemptible crime against children. Unfortunately, the educational system in the United States commits such a crime because teachers are not required to learn these methods of reading instruction. Rather, such methods are primarily available in commercial reading programs that are based on methods developed by Orton and Gillingham for remediation of dyslexia. Furthermore, American elementary schools are not required to detect early deficits in reading acquisition, so children with difficulties in developing phoneme awareness and the sublexical pathway instead often develop right hemisphere compensations for recognizing words. These compensations help in the short run, but they do not provide the basis for the later development of highly efficient reading and spelling. Such a child might appear to be learning to read okay in the early grades, but be unable to develop fluent reading and spelling later on, and so would not be identified as having a learning disability until, say, middle school. At this point, remediation is much more difficult. Instead, if deficits in phoneme awareness and development of the sublexical pathway were identified and treated early, Some children could be nudged onto the typical developmental pathway, as discussed in more detail shortly. Therefore, it is vital to evaluate whether reading acquisition is proceeding normally in the early grades. Reading acquisition can be tested by means of phoneme awareness tasks, reading of made-up words, and by a test called rapid automatized naming, where a child must quickly name a series of individual letters. So what can be done to help children who are having difficulty in learning to read? The first step is to determine whether the child has the phoneme awareness skills to sound out made-up words, such as bimp. If a child is unable to read made-up words at all, remediation should focus on the instruction we have just summarized, which requires private instruction in a program based on Orton-Gillingham methods. For example, Sounds and Syllables is an excellent such program. If a child can accurately sound out short made-up words, but only very slowly with effort, the child may not have had sufficient practice. So if such a child has not received intensive phoneme awareness training, the child should undergo such instruction. Focus on these skills can help nudge some children with dyslexia onto the typical developmental path, and then reading acquisition may proceed more normally. In particular, intensive instruction could compensate for weaker connectivity between the executive and phonological systems, allowing development of phoneme awareness. Then, if the child possesses the necessary visual processing skills, reading acquisition can get back onto track. In contrast, if a child accurately sounds out short, made-up words very slowly despite intensive practice, the child may be stuck at the early stages of reading acquisition due to difficulty with narrowing or shifting visual attention, rather than by a problem with phoneme awareness. If an older child can read short made-up words fairly quickly, but struggles with longer ones such as krondap, reads text slowly, and makes a lot of spelling errors, the child may be limited in the later stages of reading acquisition by poor neural timing and/or increased crowding. Fortunately, all of these visual skills can be strengthened by tasks requiring interaction with multiple quickly moving objects. While many parents may not like to hear this, at present, action video games provide the best such option for such visual training. Indeed, in an Italian study, one group of dyslexics played action video games for a total of 12 hours over several weeks, while a second group of dyslexics played slow video games for the same amount of time. Afterwards, the action group could read more quickly and just as accurately, while the non-action group did not improve. The study used mini-games from a Wii game called Raymond Raving Rabbids, but other age-appropriate action video games should also hone visual processing. For example, the ancient game Space Invaders is a bloodless action video game that is available free online. So children who read accurately but slowly may benefit from playing action video games. They should continue to practice sounding out consistent words and made-up words so that improved visual skills can drive the typical neural specializations required for reading. It may be helpful to use a font with wide spacing between letters, such as Open Dyslexic, to promote attentional selection and reduce crowding. Research on reading acquisition has begun to reveal how neural specializations for reading develop and what skills are necessary for this development. Our current best knowledge of reading acquisition should inform reading instruction for all children. However, more research is required to iron out the details of reading acquisition and to determine the best ways to identify and remediate different causes of reading disability. Software should be developed that is specifically aimed at instantiation of letter phoneme representations on the audiovisual speech pathway and at improving the visual processing skills required for skilled reading acquisition. Hopefully, governing bodies, funding agencies, and researchers will rise to meet these challenges.